didn't like the treatment at all. The medicine they gave him was bitter. The officials and the attendants were unfriendly and silent and strict. He never saw anyone else, except a very severe doctor who visited him occasionally. It's more like being in a prison than a hospital. He had to work hard, starting at stated hours, at digging, carpentry and painting bare boards, all one plain colour. He was never allowed outside, and the windows all looked inwards. They kept him in the dark for hours at a stretch. To do some thinking, they said. He lost time on account of town, didn't even begin to feel better. Or if that could be judged by whether he felt any pleasure in doing anything, he didn't, not even in getting into bed. At first, during the first century or so, I'm merely giving his impression, he used to worry aimlessly about the past. One thing he kept on repeating to himself as he lay in his dark, I wish I had called on Parish the first morning after the high winds began. I meant to. First loose tiles would have been easy to fix. And Mr. Parish might never have caught cold. Mrs. Parish might never have caught cold. They shouldn't have caught cold either. Then I should have had a week longer. But in time, he forgot that it was he that had wanted a week longer for. What he'd wanted the week longer for. If he worried at all after that, it was about his jobs in the hospital. He planned them out, thinking how quickly he could stop that board creaking, or rehang the door, or mend that table leg. Probably really became rather useful, though no one ever told him so. But that, of course, could not have been the reason that they kept the poor little man so long. They may have been waiting for him to get better, and judging better by some odd medical standard of their own. At any rate, poor Niggle got no pleasure out of life. Not what he had been used to call pleasure. He was certainly not amused, but it could not be denied that he began to have a feeling of, satisfaction, bread rather than jam. He could take up a task the moment one bell rang, and lay it down promptly the moment the next one went, all tidy and ready to be continued at the right time. He got through quite a lot in a day. Now he finished small things off neatly. He'd no time of his own, except alone in his bed cell, and yet he was becoming master of his time. He began to know just what he could do with it. There was no sense of rush, and he was quieter inside now, and at resting time he could really rest. Then suddenly they changed all his hours. They hardly let him go to bed at all. They took him off carpentry altogether and kept him at plain digging day after day. He took it fairly well. It was a long while before he even began to grope in the back of his mind for the curses that he had practically forgotten. He went on digging till his back seemed broken, his hands were raw, and he felt that he couldn't manage another spadeful. Nobody thanked him, but the doctor came and looked at him. Knock off, he said. Complete rest in the dark. Niggle was lying in the dark, resting completely, so that, as he had not been either feeling or thinking at all, he might have been lying there for hours or for years, as far as he could tell. But now he heard voices. Not voices that he'd ever heard before. There seemed to be a medical board, or perhaps a court of inquiry, going on close at hand and in an adjoining room, with the door open possibly, or he couldn't see any light. Now the Niggle case, said a voice, a severe voice, more severe than the doctor's. What's the matter with him? Said the second voice, a voice that you might have called gentle, though it was not soft. It was a voice of authority, and sounded at once hopeful and sad. What's the matter with Niggle? His heart was in the right place. Yes, but it didn't function properly, said the first voice, and his head was not screwed on tight enough. He hardly ever thought at all. Look at the time he wasted not even amusing himself. He never got ready for his journey, he was moderately well off, and yet he arrived here almost destitute, and had to be put into the pauper's wing. Bad case, I'm afraid. I think you should stay some time yet. It would not do him any harm, perhaps, said the second voice, but of course he's only a little man. He's never meant to be anything very much. He's never very strong. Let's look at the record. Yes, there are favourable points, you know. Perhaps, said the first voice, but very few that really bear examination well, said the second man. There are these. He was a painter by nature, in a minor way, of course, but still, a leaf by niggle has a charm of its own. He took a great deal of pains with leaves, just for their own sake, but he never thought that they made him important. There's no note in the records of his pretending, even to himself, that it excused his neglect of things ordered by the law. Then he should not have neglected so many, said the first voice. All the same, he did answer a good many calls, a small percentage, mostly of the easier sort, and he called them interruptions. The records are full of the word, together with a lot of complaints and silly imprecations. True, they look like interruptions to him, of course, poor little man. There is this, he never expected any return, as so many of his sort call it. There's the parish case, the one that came in later. He was Niggle's neighbour, never did a stroke for him, seldom showed any gratitude at all. But there is no note in the records that Niggle expected Parish's gratitude. Doesn't seem to have thought about it. And that's a point, said the first voice, but rather small. I think you'll find Niggle often merely forgot. Things he had to do for Parish he put out of his mind as a nuisance. He'd done with. Still, there is this last report, said the second voice, that wet bicycle ride. I lay stress on that. Seems plain that this was a genuine sacrifice. Niggle guessed that he was throwing away his last chance with his picture. He guessed, too, that Parish was worrying unnecessarily. I think you put it too strongly, said the first voice, but you have the last word. It's your task, and of course to put the best interpretations on the facts. Sometimes they will bear it. What do you propose? I think it is a case for a little gentle treatment now, said the second voice. Niggle thought that he'd never heard anything so generous as that voice. It made gentle treatment sound like a load of rich gifts and the summons to a king's feast. Then suddenly Niggle felt ashamed. To hear that he was considered a case for gentle treatment overwhelmed him, and made him blush in the dark. It was like being publicly praised, when you and all the audience knew that the praise wasn't deserved. Niggle hid his blushes in the rough blanket. There was silence. Then the first voice spoke to Niggle, quite close. You've been listening? It said. Yes, said Niggle. Well, what have you to say? Could you tell me about Parish? Said Niggle. I should like to see him again. Hope he is not very ill. Can you cure his leg? It's to give him such a wretched time. And please don't worry about him and me. He is a very good neighbour, and left me have excellent potatoes very cheap, which saved me a lot of time. Did he? Said the first voice. Glad to hear it. There's another silence. Niggle heard the voices receding. I agree, said the first voice, saying in the distance. Let him go on to the next stage. Tomorrow, if you like. Niggle woke up to find his blinds were drawn and his little cell was full of sunshine. He got up and found that some comfortable clothes had been put out for him, not hospital uniform. After breakfast the doctor treated his sore hands, putting some salve on them that healed them at once. He gave Niggle some good advice and a bottle of tonic in case he needed it. In the middle of the morning they gave Niggle a biscuit and a glass of wine, and then they gave him a ticket. You have to go to the railway station now, said the doctor. The porter will look after you. Goodbye.